Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, I had a voice radio, so today I'm going to be showing you a fairly interesting new Dusknoir card that could see a little bit of play if it gets just a little bit of help. Now, it's coming out in Burning Shadows, but before we get to him, I want to give a quick shout out to Dusknoir. Now, this is the stage 1, but it's got a really nice attack for a single psychic energy. Put 1 damage counter on each Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's. Now, this could actually be kind of useful here, because if you're against a Gyarados deck, they generally use Team Magma's secret base to get all of their Magikarp 10 HP away from being KO'd. So Dusknoir comes in here, as long as the Gyarados player isn't using a Machoke, and wins you that matchup. Although if they are using a Machoke, just play a Hex Maniac, and then do this to win that matchup. And it's really nice if you're playing a Stage 2, to have a Stage 1 that covers a matchup for you. It's actually incredibly handy. And it could actually be kind of cool if you're playing something like Drampa. Drampa's Berserk does 150. If you've got a damaged Pokemon on your bench, this will hook you up quite nicely. Now, moving on to Dusknoir properly, 150 HP is about standard for Stage 2s at the moment, but it's still a fairly hefty number. Being Psychic means you're hitting weakness against things like Espeon EX and Espeon GX, and so on. Garbodor as well. But he's a Psychic that's weak to Dark. That means you're not weak to Garbodor, but you are weak to things like Darkrai. And of course, fighting resistance is always good, and a retreat cost of 3 is heavy. Get it? But it does mean that you can use Heavy Ball in order to search him out, so it's far from the end of the world here. Now, his ability, Dark Circle, is a very, very interesting ability indeed. Once during your turn, you may look at your opponent's hand, put a basic Pokemon you find there onto your opponent's bench, and put 3 damage counters on that Pokemon. Now, there's several things at play here. First of all, you get to look at your opponent's hand. Now, remember that Gumshoe's GX has an ability that just lets you look at your opponent's hand. And that has seen play for the ability. Now, Gumshoe's GX also has Gumshoe's Chance, which is a really nice GX attack. Stops your opponent piling energy on, but let's ignore that for the moment. It's a good ability. This ability also lets you look at your opponent's hand, but it does so much more. And you get information here. You might be thinking, oh, I don't know if I really want to use, I don't know, let's say Drampa GX's GX attack. I don't know whether I want to use Big Wheel. I know. Look at their hand. Do they have an N in hand? If they don't, it's probably safe to use Drampa's GX attack, or indeed Metagross's. And if they have an N in hand, maybe you don't do it because you know you're definitely going to be end next turn. Worried about benching a Pokemon and having it brought up with a Lysander? Look at your opponent's hand to see. Now, don't get me wrong, ladies and gentlemen, this isn't perfect. But one of the best uses here, let's say you've got a N and a Professor Sycamore in your hand. You're wondering which of them to play. Look at your opponent's hand. If they've got a handful of supporters and stuff and cards to play next turn, you play the N to disrupt them. But if their hand is 2 unplayable Pokemon and an energy, you play that Sycamore so that you don't give them a new hand in a situation when they would really like a new hand. So just looking at their hand is good. But we've also here got the 3 damage counters. Now, sometimes you might get a bit lucky. Now, I've already said that Dusknoir should really help you against Gyarados, but if you can find a Magikarp in their hand, you bench it, put 3 damage counters, they are instantly KO'd. And, of course, something like a Feebas would be instantly KO'd. Now, we'd have to check the ruling with Team Magma's secret base here, but Team Magma's secret base says whenever any player puts a basic Pokemon from his or her hand onto his or her bench, put 2 damage counters on them. Now, we will need a ruling on this. The problem I find here with Dusknoir is that unfortunately you're not actually putting it from your hand, you're putting it from their hand. So I don't think it would work, but if it does, that would be pretty funky. Even if not, you're still bringing your opponent's Pokemon down by 30 HP. So, I mean, I don't think you'd actually be playing it in this, but let's say you've got a couple of Decidueye in play as well. Well, let's say you've got 2 Decidueye in play. You grab a Trubbish and put it on the bench. That brings it down to 40 HP. 2 Feather Arrows will get the KO. Whereas normally 2 Feather Arrows would leave it with 30 HP remaining. Could be an awful lot of fun. But this also combos really, really nicely with the attack Mind Jack. And Mind Jack might sound familiar, because that's the name of Zoroark's attack. Mind Jack does 30 damage, plus 30 more for each of your opponent's benched Pokemon. Now this is a slightly more powerful Mind Jack than Zoroark. Zoroark's was 10 plus 30 for each bench. This is 30 plus 30 for each bench. But then again, Zoroark was a stage 1 who can attack for a double colourless energy. Dusknoir is a stage 2 that attacks for a double colourless and a psychic, and that is a big sticking point right away. This is a stage 2 and it is a very expensive attack. That's a slight problem. But if your opponent's got 5 benched Pokemon here, you're doing 180 damage. That's enough to KO EXs and basic GXs. And of course you can play a choice band, so that goes up to 210. So now those stage 1 GXs are being taken down. And let's not forget that at least for the moment, we've got Captivating Pokepuff, which will allow you to put any of your opponent's Pokemon from their hand onto their bench. So what you do here is you use Dusknoir's ability, put one on the bench, and if you saw more Pokemon in your opponent's hand, basic Pokemon that is, you can just put them down with Captivating Pokepuff. Given that this was released in Steam Siege, it's overwhelmingly likely that this will be around next format. One card that you might want to be around that unfortunately is very unlikely to be around is Skyfield. Skyfield came out in Roaring Skies. We are expecting Roaring Skies to rotate. It is overwhelmingly likely that Roaring Skies will rotate, and that means that we're going to lose Skyfield, which is a slight issue here. If your opponent could have 8 Pokemon on the bench, this would be even better. Now, there's nothing to stop you playing Dusknoir with Zoroark. If you ever played a mirror match, you'd have a huge advantage, because Zoroark hits Dusknoir for weakness. But here, you are reliant on your opponent putting Pokemon on the bench. Now, as I've said a number of times, your opponent will have to stop themselves doing what they want in order to slow you down here. And whenever you're in a situation where your opponent is not benching Pokemon they want to bench to spite you, then that's actually a really good position for you to be in, because your opponent's not playing like they want. But let's say you're playing against something like a Sylveon deck. A Sylveon deck will generally play 4 Eevees and 4 Sylveon, which means that they cannot ever have more than 3 bench Pokemon, and that's if they're playing every single Pokemon to the bench. So you're never going to be hitting more than 120, 30 base plus 30 for each of the 3 benched, without playing something like a Choice Band to augment that damage. Even so, this is an attack that can work. But as we've seen with Zoroark, it's not good enough on its own. Zoroark generally needs Zoroark Break and maybe other attackers like Vespiquen or Zebstrika in order to really come against a lot of decks, and I really think Dusknoir is the same here. I love the ability. The information you get from looking at their hand is brilliant. Being able to bench Pokemon they don't want to bench, like for instance benching their Tapu Lele, and not letting them have the ability, that's really, really fun. And just being able to put 3 damage counters on them at the same time, I like that. That's a very nice thing to do. Well, nice for you, kind of mean for your opponent. It's not a nice thing to do for them. But it is going to be fun, so I will allow it. It is a stage 2. And because you're not using Fairy Energy, that Diancie I profiled a couple days ago is unlikely to help. So it's going to be kind of slow, and the attack is kind of expensive. But I love the ability here. I am going to go out on a limb and give this 3 Wassies, and that feels generous. But I like Dusclops' attack, and I love the ability on Dusknoir. I really do think some people are going to find the room in their deck to play this, because I think it could really help a bunch of decks out. But if you disagree with me, ladies and gentlemen, well, that is what the comment section is there for. Go nuts, be nice. Make sure you like this video, make sure you subscribe to this channel, make sure you follow me on Twitter @TheWassy, and the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.